Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I wish every introduction started with, here's someone you need to be really nice to. That doesn't happen to me very often. I'll take it. Well, as John noted, I have had the privilege of working to negotiate and finalize the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement over the past couple of years. And it really is historic for many reasons and an important part of both our trade agenda and our foreign policy agenda going forward in a region that is both economically and politically dynamic. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk a little bit about what TPP is, why it matters, and frankly, why we need your help to tell that story to our members of Congress and to others in the public who might be hearing these days some negative things about trade and who need to understand what trade means for your pocketbooks. So I'll start and take you through here. But the TPP is 40% of global GDP sitting around one table. 12 countries in the Asia Pacific that represent, again, 40% of the global economy and creates the highest standard free trade agreement in history. Farmers and ranchers will get unprecedented access to 12 countries in the Asia Pacific through this agreement. 2/3 of the world's middle class by 2030 will live in the countries that live in the East Asian region here. TPP is also, as I noted, a core part of our foreign policy agenda as well. Remember that our economic allies are our political allies, and so the Obama administration has been stressing this pivot to Asia, one of the most, again, dynamic politically and economically regions of the world, and this agreement reflects that commitment. The countries in the Trans-Pacific Partnership are, of course, those Asia-Pacific countries, so both sides of the Pacific Ocean. Our NAFTA partners are there. Key Latin American trade partners like Chile, Peru are there. Our ANZAC partners, Australia, New Zealand, and key markets like Vietnam and Malaysia. Now, some of these countries we already have free trade agreements with, and so for the most part, our tariffs with them are at zero. But what TPP does is gives us an opportunity to sort of modernize those agreements, to take the new standards we've negotiated in TPP and apply those as well with these new countries. Think about NAFTA. We've had our NAFTA partners for 20 plus years now. And think about how global commerce has changed. For the first time in a free trade agreement, there's a chapter in TPP on a free and open internet. Much of the ag economy, let alone the rest of our economy, now occurs through e-commerce. Rules about that didn't exist before. We didn't have an internet when we negotiated NAFTA. So we've been able to upgrade the agreements that we do have and forge new ones with countries with whom we have no FTA. And these TPP countries are pretty darn important to us already. 39% of our exports of all goods and services already go to TPP countries. 43% of our agricultural exports go to these partners. So they are already important partners for us. If you think about TPP basically what trade agreements do is they reduce the cost and the risk of doing business. So if a tariff is just 5% on a product and it goes to zero, that's more money you put in your pocket for every dollar you already send to those countries. But by taking those tariffs to zero and aligning our rules with those countries, we not only make more money on every dollar we already send, but we expect to increase our market share and our volumes into those countries as well. And an important fact about TPP countries is you have key emerging markets, particularly Vietnam and Malaysia, who not only are rapidly growing in their population, unlike the United States or Japan, whose populations are more stable, these are rapidly growing populations, and the percentage of those populations joining the middle class is growing rapidly as well. And when you join the middle class and you have disposable income for the first time, you don't have to worry about the number of calories. The first thing you change is what you eat. And you demand higher quality products and then specifically higher protein products. So if you look at Vietnam and Malaysia today, they import a lot of our raw commodities, corn, soybeans, skim milk powder. We think we're going to sell them more of all of those as they feed their growing livestock industries. But like most countries in Southeast Asia, they don't have the land to be supplying themselves with all of the protein they need. So not only will we increase current exports, but we see these as huge growth markets for pork, for poultry, for beef, for dairy products. And they're going to be looking at their nutrition, not just protein, but nutrition overall. We are great exporters of fresh fruits and vegetables and processed agricultural commodities as well. Both of these countries we see as strong and growing markets for those products going forward. The other thing we did in TPP was make a strong commitment to say every agricultural product without exception will be liberalized in some way. That has not always been the case in past FTAs that the United States has negotiated, and it certainly hasn't been the case with our trading partners. We've had NAFTA with Canada for 20 years, and yet they refused to touch dairy, poultry, or eggs. Those are their supply management sectors. They did not allow new access. TPP provides new access for every dairy, poultry, and egg product. Japan has economic partnership agreements, what they call FTAs, with a number of other countries, but never before did they put their sacred products on the table. And there's a lot of them. It's dairy, pork, beef, wheat, rice, and sugar, all excluded from previous agreements. Every product has new market access for the United States going into Japan under TPP. Brunei, Japan, Malaysia, New Zealand, and Vietnam, those are the 5 countries in TPP with whom we had no prior FTA, will eliminate their duties on 93% of every agricultural tariff line. 70% of those will be eliminated on the day it enters into force. TPP also establishes some of the highest rules in a free trade agreement. Rules on SPS standards. Just when your tariff goes down, sometimes those animal health regulations go up, and they become a little bit more difficult to navigate. The SPS rules in TPP will help to prevent that. First ever rules on geographic indications. For any of you who may also be in the dairy industry or who are looking at some specialty meat products, you know that Europe is trying to get other countries to protect in a very broad fashion geographical names. And they deserve protection in some cases. A cheese like Parmigiano Reggiano, if it doesn't come from the Parma region of Italy, as the name indicates, you can understand why they would want to protect that dual-named piece of their intellectual property for those cheeses. But Parmesan, the generic name that refers to a similar type of cheese, is produced all over the world, including in the United States, by families of Italian origin for decades. What Europe is asking other countries to do is not only to protect the use of the name Parmigiano Reggiano, but to not allow any other country or company to sell Parmesan in their markets as well. So we established in TPP the first ever rules on geographic indications that would allow countries and companies to oppose and ask for cancellation of geographical indications that are being applied in a way that is too broad. So if you can show that those cheeses are being sold generically in that market, you could oppose and then have canceled a geographic indication. And we just talked about a market like Vietnam. 90 million people, not traditionally consumers of dairy, but as their demand for protein, as their diets become more Western, huge market for U.S. cheese. We don't want to shut that down by the overly broad protection of GIs before we can get our foot in the door. So very important to U.S. agriculture. There are stronger rules on technical barriers to trade, issues of making sure those standards are being applied fairly, technical and quality standards being applied fairly to foreign and domestic product and in a transparent way. But really the kicker here is all this adds up to increased income. More exports in volume, in value, and variety. And a number of institutes have looked at what economically this means for the U.S. The Farm Bureau is one of the most recent analyses that says overall TPP for agriculture means an additional $4.4 billion in farm income. That's not the exports, that's what's left over in your pocket, $4.4 billion in farm income each and every year. And what does this mean for pork? One of the most important, well, the most important by value market for pork for the United States is, of course, Japan. And Japan has a pretty complicated system in place if you're trying to export pork there. There's a low tariff overall, but that tariff is really applied in concert with their gate price mechanism. And so that 4.4% tariff that's applied to all pork, that's going to go away. And it's going to go away in about 10 years. But the gate price, it was important to them that the gate price remains. And for so many of you know how it works, some of you maybe don't. 482 yen, it's a key price. If you send a mixed shipment of several different types of cuts of pork and the average price per kilogram is 482 yen or higher, all you pay is that 4%. But if it lands and it's lower, if it's 300 yen, you make up the difference. So you pay 182 yen per kilogram plus 4.4%. Makes it really hard to be able to ship in one shipment low-cost cuts of pork into Japan. It's a complicated system. It's one I think that only my Japanese negotiator colleagues could have dreamed up. They're very good at very complicated approaches, although we navigated them eventually. But we tried as we might. The gate price system stayed, but we've hollowed it out from below. So no matter what price it comes in at, if it comes in at 432 yen, they'll make up the difference, 50 yen. But by year 10, even if it comes in at 300 yen, all they can charge is that 50 yen. And so we have an opportunity for the first time under TPP to be able to sell an entire container, an entire shipment full of low-cost pork at a competitive rate. And that not only changes what we can send and the volumes we think we will send, it changes how you can market your product. Around the globe, U.S. pork, U.S. beef, U.S. products have a strong name attached to them. There is recognition that they are safe and they are of high quality, and that when you ask for something, you get it on time and as desired. There's a good reputation for U.S. ag. This allows us to send a whole container of one cut directly to an end user, not to a distributor who has to unpack this mixed load where you had to put high-cost cuts and low-cost cuts together to hit that 482 yen. So you're sending your product to a distributor. You can send that product to the retailer now. You can do a special that showcases that you have a specific volume sent in and form relationships with the end users of your product in a way you never could before. So we're very excited both about the opportunity to sell that U.S. brand as well as to sell more of the pork you produce every day. In Vietnam, let's not forget a market that, again, that consumption of meat is rising. They have consumption patterns similar in Vietnam and Malaysia to those of the Chinese. Pork is a preferred meat in their diet. We think there's a real opportunity there. Tariffs as high as 30% going to zero in 5 to 10 years. So big opportunity there. Again, we talked a little bit about the different groups out there that are analyzing the impact of TPP. And everybody kind of uses their own analysis. Some of them look at the comparison as today and in the future. Some have a baseline projection with and without TPP. So the numbers vary, but the one thing that doesn't is that this is a win for U.S. pork. Farm Bureau estimates $940 million worth of new exports. ITC is lower, but again, working off of a baseline of more than $200 million in exports each year. So that's the market access. That's the volume and the value of the sales themselves. But perhaps even more important than the increased volume of exports of our pork and of our fruits and vegetables and our grains is the fact that we have an opportunity through TPP to export the way that the U.S. does business. And we rely on things like scientific-based decision-making. There are new commitments in TPP on sanitary and phytosanitary standards. Fairly applying, being transparent in our technical barriers to trade. Strong protections for intellectual property. The United States is a culture of innovation, and we're able to continue to spur that innovation to capitalize and profit from our innovative endeavors because we protect intellectual property. The first ever disciplines on state-owned enterprises. In a number of countries around the globe, you're trying to compete and do a commercial transaction with an entity that's really partially governmental and has many other benefits and in that marketplace that you don't enjoy. Under TPP, state-owned enterprises will be required to compete on a commercial basis with your transactions for ag products. For the first time in a free trade agreement, we have new commitments on labor rights and the environment. Those commitments reflect U.S. practice. They don't require us to change or adopt new laws, but they do make sure that all countries have in place some basic protections for workers and basic environmental standards that help to level the playing field that all of you are playing in today. We should be creating an incentive to do trade with others who are willing to reflect those things that we value as our country, but that sometimes others use to get ahead. This is a way to bring everyone to at least those minimum standards and to work together on a similar playing field. Let me talk a little bit more about those SPS rules in particular. Again, the sanitary and phytosanitary rules of the WTO say that measures that you take to protect animal health, plant health, human health, and food safety should be based on science. But in the TPP SPS chapter, we go further than that. We build on that WTO commitment to say that a full risk analysis needs to be used as the basis for your measure. You don't just show that there is, in fact, some risk to animal health. You need to be able to be transparent about it and show that, and then to show that your response is also scientifically based and no more trade restrictive than necessary. We might have certain pests or diseases in the United States, and it might be perfectly legitimate for other countries to put in place a measure that would help to make sure that disease does not spread to their swine herd or to their citrus crops. We do that in the United States. But we need to do that in a way that still allows trade to flow as long as the risk is managed. Sometimes it's very tempting for countries to say, oh, they have this pest, we just won't let in anything. This says your measure has to match the risk. And if there are alternative ways of achieving an effective mitigation of that risk, you need to consider those and let them come forward. It also establishes a rapid response mechanism. Now, all of you are shipping in a product that is perishable. It's okay in a refrigerated container for a while, but you don't want it sitting at your port for a long time. One of the problems we have in trade is that sometimes products fail an inspection. They don't have the right paperwork, but no one knows there's a problem for a significant period of time. And so this requires that when a product is detained at port for any reason, importers and exporters are notified as soon as possible so that that can be rectified. And they are not only notified that the shipment is detained, but why and exactly what their options are for remedying it. And in pork, if you're in a refrigerated container, if you're a frozen product, you have a little bit of time to wait. Imagine what your friends in fresh fruits and vegetable exports are thinking. You can go from having tomatoes to tomato soup in a matter of days. And so this is really important for agriculture in particular. And we're promoting transparency and anti-corruption, moving toward more common platforms for paperwork that provide less alternatives to alter manifests and do things on the corruption side of things. But also moving toward notice and comment in rulemaking. Craig was talking about putting out proposed rules and the way that we encourage that comment. We take great pains to make sure all of you have the opportunity to say, this is what this rule actually means for me in practice as a business person. Here's how I think trading partners might react. We want foreign governments to comment on whether they could meet the standards of these rules so that we can eventually get the final rule right. We make adjustments all the time. That is a luxury. It doesn't happen in a lot of our trading partners, but TPP will require that kind of transparency and participation in the rulemaking process with all of our partners. So we can try and avoid some of those trade barriers before they become final rules. And we've negotiated an agreement that affirms U.S. standards on food safety. Some of you will hear out there that somehow by negotiating these trade agreements, we allow other countries to cut corners. And that is not the case. I can assure you that when we negotiate, it's USTR at the table, but sitting next to me is APHIS and FSIS and EPA and FDA, our regulators, saying, here, this language would allow us to keep doing business and to meet U.S. standards and to certify that food coming into the U.S. is safe and that our swine herd and our citrus groves or whatever it might be are protected as well. So TPP will not require us to change any of our food safety standards or practices, but it will require other countries to ensure that their practices are based on sound science. And last, I have to mention that TPP is the first trade agreement ever to have a specific annex on biotechnology and another on the organic industry, two vitally important and growing parts of our U.S. ag industry. On biotechnology, we all know that big exports of corn, for example, have been stopped into China because of asynchronous approvals. Product approved in one country, not in another, creates real gridlock at the border. Difficult for all of us. This annex for the first time says that all 12 of those TPP countries, and think about it, it's kind of remarkable. You have the U.S. and Canada, long time experience with biotech, but countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, Australia, New Zealand have experiences to a different degree, have different degrees, frankly, of public acceptance of this technology, all signed an annex saying that their approval system should be transparent and based on science and predictable. There's also language about low-level presence. So when that asynchrony, that difference in timing of approvals happens, when a product is approved in one country but not in another, and that product shows up in trace levels at the country that has not yet approved it, that countries will work together to make sure that that recipient country has all the information they need to quickly assess whether there is a safety issue, and if they can determine there is not, that trade would be allowed to flow while their approval process moves forward. So again, trying to prevent trade barriers before they happen. There's also an annex on to the TBT chapter on organics. Our sales of organic product to other countries where they have recognized our organic program as equivalent have really burgeoned there. This annex says we should be taking a look and sharing information across those programs to see if we can register them as equivalent and provide opportunities there as well. So what does it mean, though, if we don't act? And, I think in the livestock industry, the Farm Bureau estimates $5.8 billion in cash receipts from increased exports. Obviously, we can't realize those gains if we don't have TPP. The Peterson Institute on International Economics, a nonpartisan think tank, has looked across the economy, said that delaying TPP by 1 year deprives us with $94 billion of benefits to the U.S. economy. That's a $700 check for every U.S. family every year. I know my family could use that. I think just filling my refrigerator for my 2 children could easily eat up that $700 there. And in the absence of TPP, the ITC noted that $7.2 billion would be lost to the U.S. economy each year. But those estimates assume that the rest of the world is just hanging out while we either do TPP or we don't. And that, my friends, is rather false. All throughout the Asia-Pacific region, others are trying to create these preferential agreements for themselves. If you look back at 1975, you basically had the EU, kind of a customs union in the Caribbean, not a lot else happening around the world in terms of countries really coming together and doing trade deals. 20 years later, the world's a pretty different place. Look at how far the EU has integrated. African countries are taking advantage of preferential trade agreements. We have NAFTA, but little else at that point. But 20 years after that, the world is a very different place. And frankly, this is my 2014 map. I would have a lot more lines I'd need to fill in just looking at what's happened in the last year and a half. Look at Asia. All the red lines on this graph are involving the Asia region. That's where it's exploded recently. They're doing trade deals amongst each other. They're reaching out to every other region of the globe. And frankly, we don't have very many lines coming out of the United States. We have 14 free trade deals. That is not enough to make us integrated into the global economy, and other countries are finishing them while we sit and wait. While we negotiated TPP, 2 of our TPP trading partners, Japan and Australia, completed and implemented their deal. And right now, every pound of beef going into Japan pays a 10% lesser tariff than every pound of beef coming from the United States. So every day that we wait, we lose market share. The same thing is happening in wine and in dairy, where Australia and New Zealand have deals with all of the ASEAN, the Southeast Asian nations, and are paying 0 tariff on those products while we pay tariffs of 10% or more. These are areas where the United States, if we are on a level playing field, are incredibly competitive in both quality and value, and we should be having the same level playing field that others have. So with TPP, we took this strategic decision. We got 12 countries in a room that we knew would pledge, 1, that they would be comprehensive, every product on the table, and 2, that they were willing to put on the table very high standards in all those other areas I've mentioned to you. And we decided we wanted to have that core of 12 to show the benefits of economic integration that was that deep, and then to be a magnet to let others come on. And frankly, we've seen that be pretty effective. We finished negotiating on October 5th of 2015 with the TPP countries. By October 15th, 10 days later, 8 other countries had called Ambassador Froman, our U.S. trade representative, my boss. 8 other trade ministers had called him to say, when will you start accepting new members to TPP? We've seen what you've done. We've seen what you've done. We see what you've done. We see its value. We want to join the club. And these are not small countries. This is the Philippines, Indonesia, Korea, Taiwan. Recently in the press, Colombia is saying it's looking at a study of TPP and what it would take to be part of this. So we know that the model can work, but it only works if we can get it implemented and enforced. And meanwhile, while we wait, China is not standing still. They have their own vision about what should be the regional magnet, and they call it the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the RCEP. It includes a number of our TPP partners, but other countries, particularly in South Asia as well. You can see the map and the list up there on the slide. But it's about 35% of the global economy that's at the table. And if it goes first, that's how countries are going to write their rules and their policies to meet these standards. They're going to get to this standard, which is not the way that we do business. That opportunity to export the way we do business we have in TPP. It will not surprise you that an RCEP model does not have strong rules on labor and the environment. It will not surprise you that there is no commitment to a free and open internet or to strong protections of intellectual property, and there is no guarantee that every product without exception is covered in this agreement. And so if we want to set the rules of the road, not just with those first 12, but in the Asia-Pacific region itself, we have to get TPP across the finish line. And the next step is for Congress to ratify the deal. We finished our negotiations in October. The 12 countries at the table all signed that agreement in its final form in February. It's now time for Congress to consider it. And many of you were extremely helpful a little over a year ago when we passed Trade Promotion Authority, which sets the rules for congressional consideration of these deals. It means once an implementing bill is sent to Congress, there are very clear timelines that both the House and Senate have for providing an up or down vote on this agreement. And the slide goes through that a little bit. These are maximums, not the minimums. So once that bill is submitted, within 45 days it has to come out of committee, has to go to the floor 15 days later in the House, and then it sets off the timeline in the Senate. Frankly, time's getting tight, folks. These are congressional days. But again, these are maximums. What really is required here is the commitment by Congress to move this through as soon as possible. And there is time to move TPP forward this year. And if we don't move it this year, there are the inevitable delays that come with a change in administration, trying to get people in place and to consider this deal. And every day we wait, we lose market share, and we lose the opportunity to be the thought leader, the standard bearer for what the rules will be in the region. So we have a critical period of time before Congress goes out for recess, for conventions, and for August recess, et cetera, and a critical period of time in the lame duck after the election to make sure we're having a robust discussion about what this agreement is, what it means for all of you personally in your operations, your opportunity to invest more, to earn more and spend that money in your communities, and to employ people who need jobs. Those are all things that each of you personally can do more of if you have more money in your pocket from TPP. 20% of farmer income comes from your exports. If we don't continually make efforts to maintain and expand them, that has an impact on your pocketbook. And so we rely on all of you to help make the case in a very personal way why this is important. And I think it's also important when we think about who we want the United States to be in the world. We are exporting our way of doing business. We will have to make almost no changes except for to our tariff code if TPP goes into effect. Other countries will fundamentally change their laws and regulations to protect intellectual property, the environment and labor standards that they have in their codes, some of the rules of their national health systems. These are not easy for them economically or politically. A number of these countries still earn a great deal of their national revenue through tariffs that they are agreeing to eliminate in order to be allied with the United States and the 11 other countries at the table. And so if the United States, who pushed hard for all of these standards to be in the agreement, is the country that doesn't follow through, that will damage our standing in the Asia Pacific. And we know from the slide earlier who is ready to be there to take our place. And so we have to think about what this means, not just for our pocketbooks, but for our ability to have influence in a region of the world that is so critically important politically as well. Now, the U.S. ag community has been great. So here's just a smattering of the folks who have said they're all in, they support TPP, your friends and allies, in making the case for why this is so important. And, we really could not have negotiated it without the information we received from NPPC and from a number of these other organizations about exactly which tariff lines and products and strategies were important to you to get the best deal possible. We're very grateful for that. And we're going to arm you with what you need to make the case. So this particular slide, take a picture of it if you want. It's going to take you to all of the websites that have fact sheets about what's in the TPP, what the expected gains will be for both the pork sector but the rest of U.S. agriculture as well. a comprehensive resource. The entire text of the deal, 5,000 plus pages, is available for the U.S. public to read at any time on the USTR website. Again, you should have the right to know what we would agree to. You can find it all there. The White House website has a number of speeches, comments made about TPP. You can hear the context it's being put in. Commerce has resources on the industrial sector and those benefits as well, and the ITC study is also available for you. So anything you want to know, it is there. I'm sorry, I told you to take a picture of a slide that I didn't put up yet. So there is all of the web addresses. I can go back to it later. And just to give you a sense of what these fact sheets look like, we've done them in very easy, catchy infographic form. You do not need to be a trade expert to look and see that for Iowa there are real highlights and gains in the areas of soybeans, pork, corn, and beef. You can see the top 5 exports, what we think it will mean in terms of new exports for Iowa. We did it this way for a reason, and it is that we hope you will plagiarize it widely. It would look great in your county newspaper to share at the coffee shop, wherever you want to repeat it, but I think we need to remind folks that this is tangibly what trade agreements produce. We have these fact sheets available, again, in infographic form by commodity as well, showing you what each commodity's gains will be in each of the TPP countries. So you can find all of this online, and I encourage you to visit it there. So with that, I'm going to take you back to these. If you're curious about finding some more of that information, I'll leave that up there and open it for questions.
Presidential candidates at this point in time have spoken against a lot of these free trade agreements. Why are they so thick-headed they can't get to that side of the line?
If only I knew, right? I can't comment on the candidates, but I can say that, I get it. The rhetoric around trade right now has been pretty tough. But I think if you listen to some of that rhetoric, they conflate a trade agreement with general angst about our economy and globalization. And we shouldn't conflate the two. It is absolutely true that there are a number of industries in our country that face increasing competition and a more difficult international marketplace because of globalization. But if we don't pass TPP, globalization will not stop. Countries will not stop seeking these international supply chains, looking for ways to expand their operations. That will occur. Why shouldn't we, in that environment, seek out and create incentives to trade with other countries who say that they are willing to meet our standards, who are willing to level the playing field by protecting their environment and labor in ways that we do, who are willing to protect our intellectual property when we take the risk to go to their market so that we can continue to benefit from our innovation? Why wouldn't we, if we know that commerce will continue to move globally in an increasing magnitude, just as it has done over the past decades, why wouldn't we steer that trade to those countries who are willing to join that club by meeting those standards? That's what we're doing through FTAs. We are shaping globalization, not letting it occur without putting our imprint on it. And TPP, again, does that with the highest standards of any FTA in history. And so when folks start talking about these trade agreements being the source of this angst, I think we need to ask themselves what they're really saying. We are not going to be able to stop competing. We are not going to put the globalization genie back in the bottle, but we can craft it in a way that can better meet both our economic interests but our values as well. Oh, you had a question.
Why wouldn't we support this? What are the major objections?
Well, I think some of the key objections come from folks who are generally anti-trade or anti-globalization or concerned about what this would mean. I think some folks don't understand them. Let's admit it, a 5,000-page agreement with very technical tradeese. We don't always speak in English and in our trade craft. It makes people suspicious. They're not sure they understand it, what's at stake. Some of the things you can do is describe, as I have, that really this is a huge opportunity for us. I don't think some people realize how much we trade already, or how much the products they make are going into products that further then reverberate around the supply chain, but also that our standards are not impacted here. There have been claims that, for example, we would not apply the same food safety standards to food coming from TPP countries. That is absolutely not the case. And all of you as producers wouldn't stand for it. You wouldn't accept an agreement that somehow allowed other countries to take shortcuts. And that's absolutely not our goal here. It's to make sure we protect the environment and human health and animal and plant health as well as we expand opportunities. And so you can make a good case for that as well because of your experiences in trade.